It is testing. It is 6 o'clock and we are unmuted and ready to roll.
All right, at this time, I will call the special session, work session of Riverside Council to order. It's 6 o'clock. If you would all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Denning.
Here.
Mrs. Franklin.
Here.
Ms. Fry. Here. Mr. Joseph.
Yes.
Ms. Lomach.
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield.
Present.
Mayor Williams.
Move to excuse.
Motion to excuse the mayor,
Second.
Mr. Denning, Mr. Joseph. All those in favor?
Aye.
Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
No, Deputy Mayor.
Hearing none, we'll move on. Work session items, there are.
Wait, motion.
Approve the agenda.
Yeah.
Thank
Second.
you. Motion to approve the agenda by Mr. Joseph,
Second.
second. By Jesse.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
We have 6 items on the work session, and the first item I'll turn over to the city manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to shuffle the order of these just very briefly because I know the chief's time is a little bit sensitive this evening and his item should take us not too long to get through. So that is item number 4 on the agenda, the ordinance regarding parking in front of mailboxes. I will pull up a short map here just by way of brief introduction. You may recall we had some complaints last year about parking up in the Matt Way area. That development is a little bit tight. And I know that there have been incidents before where folks have been parking in front of mailboxes and not had mail delivered. So I asked Chief Robinson to look into that. I'll pull up a map just for reference, but Chief, take it away.
All right, thanks, sir. So the section of the ORC in regard to parking prohibition is 4511.68 if you're interested. It does mirror exactly what we have here in the city in our ordinances. Unfortunately, there is no law against parking in front of a mailbox unless we decide to put one together, because the state of Ohio does not have one. Most states do not have one. They rely on the local legislation to be done to put those in place. The post office themselves actually have policy in reference to what they want to have done as far as the distance between the mailboxes. So if you have a mailbox here, they want to be 15 feet here on this side and have to have 15 feet on that side, or to what the policy is. Now, do they go by that 100%? I don't think so, because there's plenty of times when the cars are, and I stopped and actually got out there and I did some measurements and I talked to some of the neighbors and said, hey, have you had any problems with this? And yeah, and so one of the guys had a car parked in front of his yard and he actually showed me that the mail. I asked him, I said, did you get your mail today? Because I measured it about 8 feet from the mailbox, but it's about 10 feet from the apron of the driveway. So I'd say 10 feet was probably pretty good. He said, yes. So he checked his mail and both of the guys that I talked to, actually residents, got their mail and they had really similar kind of parking in front of their mailboxes. So I would say that if we're going to do this, just let you know that out there, as you see in the picture, there are multiple different sizes distances between the aprons of these residents. And what I mean, like you'll see one to be 32 feet, one might be 28 feet, and the other one might be 72 feet between the aprons. So obviously you can park different cars. And also there has some issues there with people that own the houses, but they rent them out. Some of the houses are rented out. And so they have multiple people living there and they have multiple people that are parking on the street because they don't want to hem somebody in the driveway, which seems to be a common problem. One of the residents actually had some company was out there doing some work and they had something out there that actually kept him getting his mail for like a week and a half. And he called us and we're like, we don't have a law against that. There's nothing we can do. You could ask them to move, If we can't really do anything, there's nothing we can do about that. So basically what we're trying to get across here is to get to some kind of a legislation which would allow us to have, and I said this to the city manager, not big fangs, but it's a little bit of teeth in the game to say, okay, look, you got to move that car. Right? But my thought to him was, visually, we want to be able to go, hey, can you please move your car? That's what we really want to do. We don't want to go out there and give people a bunch of citations because look, the parking is limited out there. I mean, you got people parking down here who live up there. It's just the way it is. It's just not that much parking out there. So I think if you're going to do a legislation on that, I mean, I would say that the 10 feet would be sufficient because when I measured it out, the guys had no problem with the mail truck getting in. They kind of get in that kind of angle. But I do think we need to probably think about the time frame in which we enforce the law, because I think if you look at even in my house, I mean, I'll pull in front of my drive or my mailbox and park in front of it, but I'm leaving the next morning, so my car's gonna be gone. So he doesn't have any problems, or she doesn't have any problems getting there. So I think we need to put some kind of a time frame in there, something like maybe people get off work 5 p.m., 8 a.m., and then put a 10-foot regulation from either side of the mailbox.
Yeah, Chief, that's actually the neighborhood I live in.
Mhm.
I will say it also, as far as mail being delivered, it would depend on, there's a couple different postal workers that work there.
Mhm.
One is really strict and will not deliver
Right.
at all. And there's one that doesn't really care. So yeah, and parking is limited. It's very tight. School buses can barely get through there. That's where we have those no parking signs on one side of the street.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't follow that, unfortunately. Yeah, it's a very tight neighborhood. So, but yeah, I think there's probably something that needs to be done because we've had it in our streets where mail wouldn't deliver because mailboxes were blocked and stuff too. So,
But I think when I talked to the post office, they were saying if the mailman, obviously probably more strict guy, probably would go by, you can't deliver one day, he'll let that pass. He won't give you, but like maybe the second day or the third day, he's going to give you a note that says,
they do. He
hey,
does.
you got to move this so I can give you your mail.
So I wonder how the enforcement would play out because if we're only going to enforce it based on responding to complaints, an easy way to make it not too onerous, like you said, little things, would be that you can't park in front of other people's mailboxes, but you would be allowed to park in front of your own. And then you can make that decision on whether you want to do that or whatnot.
I mean, you could have to put that in any way you want to put that in there, sure.
So have we looked at any other cities and what their legislation may look like if they have any?
They're similar to what I'm saying, I think.
So other cities do have legislation, some
Yes.
language. Okay.
And basically, what we really only have to do is, I think I had the list of our parking prohibition. We kind of just have to add something to the very bottom of it in that parking section, just to say, this is what we're doing.
Mhm.
I think it's like, I don't know, M or N or something, that along that line.
Yeah, because I know we had a gentleman, wasn't he, last year who had come in and he was having a problem, not in this area, but he was having a problem on his street too, where they were parking in front of his mailbox.
Sure.
And
I
that
think,
was also a concern because there's not a whole lot we can do about it,
right. And I think you're gonna have the other places like Brantwood's gonna have the same kind of problem. I mean, obviously, you get down through there and go back and drag backside, it gets tight in there and stuff. So you have the same kind of problems. So it'll work for
No,
everyone.
it gets tight in my neighborhood.
Do we?
Well, but there's probably a lot of neighborhoods that gets tight. So I'm saying it would work for everyone.
Yeah.
Is there legislation about fire hydrants? I don't know the code that well, but
Mhm.
people park right beside fire hydrants.
There-
If we
there is.
don't
There
have
is, yeah.
that covered,
There is.
couldn't we add it to that?
It's in the
No,
code.
it's in there.
It's in the code.
I guess, and then I'll come back to this point about, okay, we can create this piece of legislation.
Mhm.
Where my problem is I also have
Enforcing it.
legislation that says no parking or, fire hydrants, and those are not being cited either. So, I guess, which one's, is this now going to take priority because it's a new piece of legislation?
I don't think so. I think I can't disagree that some of those things probably get overlooked sometimes. I'm sure they do. I'm sure that the folks that are working are probably really busy doing some other things. I won't tell you that because I want you to hear that. So do I say that they probably need to enforce those things? Absolutely. Am I here to tell you that we're going to do that? Yes, ma'am, we are.
So my thing is on the enforceability of this. I mean, we don't know how long our tenure is here and we're talking about it today in 2023. But when there's all new faces here, I feel like that piece of legislation is just gonna be something that someone would have to do their research, like, oh yeah, and 102 section M.3, it says that you can't park your car here. And they're gonna have to go present that to a future police force and say like, okay, can you please go move this car?
I see
Gonna be-
it more as a tool in their toolbox.
Yeah.
To be able to be used. If they have a complaint,
Correct.
then they can go and say, well, we've got this rule that says, okay, if nobody's complaining. They're not gonna go out there and write everybody a ticket, but I see it as a.
It's just
tool
courtesy.
To be used
Yeah.
when necessary.
Well, and here's the bottom line too. It helps out the postal workers too, trying to do their job. I mean, at
Right.
least they have a policy that they try to follow. I think as long as we put something in place to help them, and again, one gives the police more teeth to do something. Two, it's showing that we respect their position and what they're doing as well,
Right.
so they can do their job safely.
I mean, technically, we could say 10 feet and they could go out there and go, it's not 15 feet. By their policy, we're still not adhering to their policy, but we don't have to adhere to their policy. You as an executive branch here can make that decision to go, we want to say 10 feet. They still can go, I'm not delivering that mail.
Well, then that's up to them, but
Right.
at least we've tried, and if there's an issue and somebody complains, we can go out, knock on the door and say, hey, you're breaking the rule, you need to move your vehicle, whether it's a
Exactly.
work
So-
vehicle or whatever.
Right.
And
So
I
just kind of flip
agree
it
with
around. It
the-
gives us the ability.
I agree with the 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Because unless it's any, I mean, the only people that deliver after 5 o'clock is Amazon, so.
Now, well, I will tell you.
That is not
Ma-
true.
In our neighborhood, mail can run
Yeah.
sometimes 6, 7 o'clock at
Oh,
night.
really?
Well, and I think
I
that's
thought
what
about
they
that
have,
too.
like
I
a
was thinking
sub and they're
maybe,
running a double route.
time can be
Why
changed.
don't you just make it 8 to 8?
What,
Well,
I don't think the
Or
time.
whatever be.
Well,
yeah,
we can work that out, but what you need from us tonight is something that says, I'd like to make a motion to bring forward legislation to cover parking in front of mailboxes.
sure. I mean, you could certainly make a motion.
You
I think
don't
I've
have to
also,
make a
I've heard
motion.
probably enough just in terms of consensus where we can actually put some meat on the bones of this proposal and then get it back in front of you
Okay.
at one of the next meetings.
Before we kill this
Mhm.
topic, I think since we're talking about parking in the reference to mailboxes, I feel like Josh, police chief, service director, we've all talked about parking in general through the city. I mentioned in my neighborhood, the kind of dangerous hill with a curve to it that is unsafe. And I think both you've all went out there and seen it, but from conversation, there seems to be a problem that we need to address parking in the city in general. Like what street should have no parking on certain sides? And I feel like this is a good kickoff to just looking at that as a whole. Because it's not just limited to the mailbox.
But I will say, I mean, like I said, my neighborhood has no parking on one side of the street, on every street. Even in the cul-de-sacs, there's no parking. It's just almost impossible to enforce. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the city, and the no parking piece and putting up those signs, in my mind, was pretty much a waste of money because they're there, and now it's blocking. I got one right in front of my house blocking my view. But it's hard to enforce just because there's a lot of things going on in the city.
Well, and the other thing I might just throw out there for consideration is that, if, and I'm again if I'm thinking out loud a little bit, and if the long-term plan is we're trying to drive to a place where we can comprehensively address infrastructure, roads, stormwater, and kind of go through every road in town and redo it all at once. To my mind, that's a natural pivot point to address some of the parking concerns. Because if we're going to go through and really rebuild someday all of the roads and bring them up to a modern standard, there are probably other things in the right of way that we're going to need to adjust.
Yeah.
And parking can be one of those things. And because the neighborhoods are laid out so differently, I would be hesitant right now to go headlong into just saying everybody park on one side of the street or doing a big comprehensive parking review, if only because we're going to end up tackling that anyway as part of the process that we're on now too.
Mhm.
So I think in the interim, though, what I can do is just given the volume of complaints that we've had here and in the interest of trying to help the post office and the residents that kind of live up there because it's so congested or a little bit tighter, I should say. I'm happy to get with the chief and we'll write up an ordinance and bring it to you probably early March that just gives some contours to what you've discussed here tonight, and then we can take that forward to you.
Would that include or not include the suggestion that I proposed?
As far, which suggestion?
That it would only be relevant to parking in front of other people's mailboxes.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm happy to add that. I don't know that I didn't hear a whole lot of objection, but I can
I
certainly.
didn't get a vibe from the group, so that's why I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to add that into the draft language, and then we can certainly discuss it too, if council wants to talk about it in detail when we bring it back, so. Thanks, chief. Appreciate all your work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. City manager, you're gonna go forward.
All right, so the next item, just again for council's consideration, we've got a hodgepodge of just update things here this evening. So next on the list is I did want to give you a quick update on the work that we've plugged into the strategic planning process. And let me try to be fair to the viewers at home here and share this screen. So as you know, we went and we did the strategic planning process last year through using our partners at WBI, and that resulted in our final report as far as the actual strategic planning workshop was concerned. So this is where, council went through and identified the main areas of focus for our community in terms of governance, infrastructure, public safety, and economic development. The next phase of any strategic planning process is to then how do we bring that to life? How are we going to implement that? So I took the liberty over the last couple of weeks to just give some thought, and this is very rudimentary, but bear with me, but just to give some thought to the things that were discussed in that report as potential project ideas, along with things that we have discussed as far as my goals and other broader goals for the organization, and to lay that out in a way that will help us to think about how do we prioritize what we're going to work on going forward, and then who can the responsible parties be to be the point person to help carry those things out. I will circulate all of this to you after the meeting so that we can go through that in greater detail. I mostly wanted to use tonight just to introduce this as a concept. To me, this is implementation plans are always living documents. They are not things that you put in stone and that you work. You have to be able to adapt. 2 weeks ago, we didn't have an SS4A grant. We do now, and that changes quite a lot about what our capacity is going to look like to do stuff over the next year or two. So in the sense that these plans have to be adaptable, what I've gone through is there is a column for each of the main areas, governance, infrastructure, safety, the main categories that were identified in those areas, and then some specific projects that were either named in that report or that we've discussed in terms of goals. And then I've teed up just some early thoughts about who can be responsible for those and just some very rough dates as far as generally speaking, when on a first pass, I'd like to see these things generally come to some sort of a completion, or whether or not they're more ongoing types of activities. And again, my thought here is I'm happy to distribute this to all of you, and then, happy to get any feedback you have on this. There's also, you'll notice we've got about 41 items listed here on the table. We also want to walk that line between getting too specific on the implementation plan. You don't want an implementation plan that's 400 items long, or, it's kind of like boiling the ocean. You can't get it all done at once. At the same time, we want something that's fairly tight and focused to what council has discussed and what the priorities of the community are. So any thoughts, feedback you have, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to make tweaks and adjustments to this plan. And like I said, it's a living, breathing thing. We will keep working it. But what I would intend to do is sometime in March, come back to you both with this PowerPoint document, which is the plan that WBI produced for us, and a snapshot of the implementation plan after it's had some council comments, and have you adopt that